All right, guys, welcome back. I want to talk about another record. I was actually listening to this record last night, and you know, I always love hearing this record, so I thought, why don't we talk about this record? I don't think it gets the credit it deserves. What I'm talking about, well, let me just preface this a minute. When I was in high school, a friend of mine, like most of us who are into music, a friend of theirs tells him, dude, listen to this. Well, this was one of those things. A friend of mine, when I was in high school in 1982, a friend of mine said, dude, you got to check this guy out. So I checked it out, and it kind of blew my mind. And I don't think the guy got the credit he deserves, and he was a great guy. Great album, and he went on to do great things that some of us didn't even know about until you really dig into it, but he ended up doing all right. What I'm talking about is this dude, Aldo Nova. This record came out in 1982, January 1982. Pretty fresh into the 80s. His biggest album, of course, sometimes that happens, your debut is the one that's the biggest thing, with his biggest single, Fantasy. Everybody knows that. Life is just a fantasy. Anyway, if you were one of those young people when MTV first came out, you remember seeing that video. Some guys may have been blown away because in the video with the laser guitar and all that kind of stuff, crazy. But I heard the album before I had seen the video, and this is what blew me away. Interesting thing, I like this cover. Don't know why, I always look at this cover. There's some faint images here of Aldo Nova here, and in the back he's jumping up. One of the first dudes, when I saw this, that I noticed wearing these kind of boots. Remember them? Really popular in the 80s. I think him and Keith Richards were the only couple guys at first that I saw even wearing those kind of boots. And yeah, it inspired me. I went out and bought some similar. Not as big as Aldo Nova's, but you know, that was the cool thing to do in 1981, 82. By the way, Aldo Nova sounds like a made-up name. Kind of is. The dude's Canadian, but I guess he has Italian parents because his real name is Aldo Nova how do you say this? I don't speak Italian. Caporusco? You tell me if you're Italian. But anyway, we get his whole name, Italian. Shortened it down. You know, it's more rock and roll to have the name Aldo Nova rather than the long Italian name stuck on the end. But it's interesting to note that Aldo does speak three-language fluent English, Italian, of course, and because he's Canadian, French. He also understands Spanish really well, so he could do fine down here in Mexico. Anyway, his most popular album came out in 1982. By 1997, it had gone double platinum. It's no chump change. A lot of people bought this album, made a lot of headway because of MTV. But it also caused him some problems, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. Let's talk a little bit about this and why he's kind of fingered as the guy who started pop metal. Hear me out. What do I mean by that? Before Bon Jovi, before Def Leppard got big, you know, some of these guys like that, this guy was making music and had a style and incorporated like some of the electronics and the guitar. He was kind of like a Tom Schultz of Boston mixed in with the... That's what he was. He was the new wave, if you want to say that, Tom Schultz, who kind of busted out a new wave and went rock and roll. But pop metal, great ballads, really blended in different musical aspects and just had a knack at writing great hooks. Man, if you don't know this album, forget Fantasy. You got to check out the whole album. It is great, but it is weird because they credit Aldo to the guy who started that whole thing. And if you think he was a year or two before Bon Jovi, and Bon Jovi got big and definitely stole some of Aldo's stuff, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Before Def Leppard, Def Leppard was more rockin', but then this came out before Pyromania, and you go back and you listen to this. This was a year before Pyromania. Then you listen to Pyromania and you go, hey, well now wait a minute. And then into the mid-80s. Yeah, I agree. I think this is the guy who started it all. Doesn't get enough credit, like I said. Let's talk a little bit about this and a little bit of background about this. It's kind of weird, too. He's kind of new wave with those boots on, and look at that. In the 80s, He's a guy keeping it real. Who else was showing off a hairy chest in 1982? That wasn't a very cool thing. In the 70s, hey, come on, kimonos, bare chests, everything. But if you're kind of new wave, kind of whatever, guitar whiz, who was doing that with a big hairy chest open like that? Aldo Nova was, for sure. But let's talk about the record. Now, Aldo Nova said when he was a kid, he used to like to work with stuff and try to understand the way how things work. And then tragedy happened. When he was 13 years old, his mom was hit by a car and died. This really bummed him out. But to make him feel better, his brother bought him a guitar, and this is at the age of 13. So Aldo basically, for lack of a better word, locked himself away in his room because he's depressed. Anybody would be depressed if their mom died suddenly, right? So he locks himself away in the room and starts piddling away on the guitar that his brother bought him. Now, it seems weird if you want to say he's the new wave Tom Scholz, but he said that the first riff that he actually learned when he was playing guitar was Chicago's 25 or 6-4. What an odd riff to learn. But anyway, that was his first riff, and of course he became a riff meister after that, so good on him for that. But he would sit and listen to records and just play along with guitar. He said after 2 years of being locked in his room, he could play that damn guitar when he came out. He was one hell of a guitar player, he said, when he came out about the age of 15. Let's talk a little bit about that. When he was a teenager, late teenager, he got into a cover band, and he was doing actually, it's kind of weird if you think about it. He's playing 4 sets a night. 2 of those sets were a disco set, a rockabilly set, and a Beatles set thrown in there, where he actually wore a Beatle wig and everything like that. But he said, by doing all those Beatle covers, it really taught him how to write a song, and it taught him song structure and how to write a hit, that he believed he could do it. So he used to work at a music store, a record store during the day, I believe, or a music store, and at night he would do these gigs, right? When he would get off work, he would go home, it'd be around 4 in the morning. He said like from 4 to 9, he would work on a demo. He was going to make the big time, right? So he'd go out and gig all night, come home, and sit down, work. In this process, he was approached by a guy who said, hey man, do you know how to produce? And Aldo said, yeah dude, I can do that. And he said, right, and you know how to work in a studio? And Aldo said, yeah dude, I can do that. I guess this guy who approached him had gotten a record deal. I'm not too clear. Obviously, he did. So Aldo said, sure, dude, I can do that for you. So he said, come on, kid, you got a job. So this guy took him to the studio. And Aldo was basically just bluffing. He didn't know what he was doing. He got in there, but he was a hard worker, and he could learn fast. So he went in, started learning how to do this, whatever. And the other people in the studio, the guys who owned the studio, noticed, like, man, this guy is great. Like, he can write, and he can play, and he can put stuff together. This guy's something. Well, as it turned out, the guy who hired Aldo just kind of disappeared. So the studio heads came to Aldo and said, all right, kid, here's the deal. You keep on doing what you're doing, and you either pay us $10,000 for the time you racked up working with this clown, or let us help back you, we'll help you, and you keep doing what you're doing, and we're going to get you into fame. So, of course, he's like, man, let's do that. I want to be famous. I want to be a big rock and roll star. Although, I forgot to mention this. I said he was the new wave Tom Scholz. Get this, when he first got his contract, he was really inspired by Gary Newman, and he wanted to be super new wave, electronic, and real Brit sounding. But the time in the studio kind of changed that up, and he became kind of a rock dude, right? But his time in the studio was good because he managed to put together these 10 songs that he thought was going to make it a 10-song demo that he thought was going to blow the doors off everything and make him the new guitar hero. He was kind of right, because when he submitted that demo, CBS Records, Portrait Records, loved it. They were like, dude, this is something. And they loved the song Fantasy so much, they said, dude, let's put this out as a single. and you're going to be a superstar. He didn't really like Fantasy that much, but he said, okay, the record company wants to do it. Let's do it. So guess what? They did, became a hit on MTV, everything. Now I got to tell you something about Fantasy. He said that came to him really easy. He said he was actually walking through New York, and I think it was at the corner of Broadway and 40th. He just kind of stopped and looked around. He said, man, it's just too much. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the chicks, whatever you want to say. He said it was like, well, like a fantasy. So, boom, words, everything. He said in about a day and a half he was finished with that. Became, well, what can we say? Became Aldo Nova, huge superstar. A lot of people thought he was a one-hit wonder because of that song was so big, and then he just kind of disappeared. He did that on purpose because by the time he came around, he didn't tour behind the first album. And by the time the second album came around, the record company was like, kid, do that album again. Do another track like that. Do whatever. And he didn't want to, but he kind of had to, he wanted to do his own thing. But we're not talking about that. But one thing led to another, and he just kind of disappeared. He went back to Canada and actually started writing jingles for Coca-Cola and Canadian Air, or Canada Air, whatever. Said he made good money, and he was happy doing that. But we're talking about this. Now, some weird things about this record. Great record. Again, the inception of pop metal, great metal ballads, great guitar sounds, even some cool drum sounds. Let's talk a little bit about this and some strange things. If you look closely here, look at this. Like I said, he was the forerunner. A few years later, there's Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, whatever. Did I mention he even played guitar for Blue Oyster Cult at one point? Anyway, crazy, right? It's crazy. But if you look on the back here, look at this. Tony Bon Jovi. That's before they changed it to B-O-N and then a separate word, J-O-V-I. So he knew, is Tony his uncle, John's brother? I don't know. But when Aldo was recording this, he worked with this Bon Jovi in the studio. So of course, this Bon Jovi tells John, who's just some young upstart thinking he's going to be a rock star. He's like, John, you've got to come down and listen to this crazy Canadian guy and see what he's up to. So he brings John Bon Jovi in while Aldo's recording this debut. And John Bon Jovi's like, damn, dude, how do you get that sound? How do you make that guitar scene like that? Show me a trick or two. Obviously, Aldo Nova did. Because John Bon Jovi, a year or two later, when he put out his solo album, or Bon Jovi's first album, Runaway, guess who's on there? Aldo Nova. And Aldo Nova went on to do other things with Bon Jovi as well. I think they said he was the guy, Aldo, came up with the riff for Blaze of Glory, which was John Bon Jovi's first solo hit. But anyway, you go and you listen to that first Bon Jovi album, and you can hear that piano, which is so evident here on this album, in Fantasy, and you can hear it all over that album, actually. The guitar sounds, the piano, the sound that Aldo was doing. John Bon Jovi, let's put it this way. There would be no Bon Jovi if it wasn't for Aldo Nova. Let's just be square about that. Let's be upfront. So anyway, why is this album great? I'm gonna read you about 10 reasons why this album is great. Fantasy, it's okay. For me, it's not great. Hot Love, it's great. I love that. It's Too Late, it's great. Ball and Chain, great. Heart to Heart, all of side one. All of side one. This album alone, because of side one, it's a keeper. It's a gem. It's a classic. Then we go to side two, Fooling Yourself. Great. Under the Gun. You're My Love. I like that. Can't Stop Loving You. That's all right. See the Light. That's all right. I have to tell you, though, I really like on side two that You're My Love, the third track on side two. I love those drums, the way it starts out. Check that out. It's great. But anyway, Aldo Nova's biggest selling album with his biggest hit, Fantasy. He wasn't a one-hit wonder, and I'm going to tell you why. Remember I mentioned the record label was kind of hassling him, saying, dude, come on, kid, make that same album. No, he retreated back to Canada, wrote jingles for Canada Air and Coca-Cola and others. But about 10 years after he vanished from view, late 90s, mid to late 90s, he started working with this other Canadian named Celine Dion. You may have heard that. And he worked, funnily enough, with Faith Hill and Clay Aiken. He's been writing hits and producing tons of stuff. So a lot of people may only know him for Fantasy, but they know him for other stuff as well through other artists. They just don't know the name. In fact, he won a Grammy in 1997 for a song he wrote for Celine Dion that went #1 in 26 countries. It was a worldwide smash, and that was A New Day Has Come. He may not have got all the attention he needed for this. He did with Fantasy. This album did go double platinum around the late 90s, the same time that he got the Grammy for Celine Dion. Let's just all go back to where it starts, kids. Aldo Nova, his debut album, Aldo Nova. This is where pop metal starts. Maybe hair metal? Maybe the hairy metal guys knew how to write a good song, but not quite so poppy and with the sheen that this guy did. But he taught everybody a lesson. You need this record, and you need to go back and listen to this record. If you own this record, tell me what you think. Aldo Nova, great. Thanks, guys. Keep on rocking.